Life in prison, it was bad. The warders were all cruel. Warders were just abusing us, physically abusing us. Were doing all sorts of funny things. It was not a place for any human being to come and stay and to be treated in that kind of fashion. But we make this prison, this place, as a sweet place, as a place where we could enjoy ourselves, where we could forget about many things. Football is one of those sports which used to sustain us in terms of not think about home, not think about your sentence. We're allowed to play soccer on Saturdays. On that day, each and every section must come with his own best team. Everybody is determined, he's ready, he goes all out that they must win these guys. And then you even go to extent of buying the books, so that we must know when they say a man is offside, how do they say so? We buy all those books. But only to find that when we buy that book, another one is going to tell us, now that book is an old book. So we've got to get a new book. It's quite a struggle. Days and days, months and months, discussing about this. Terra Likota, he was one of the striker, hence he get the name Terra, because he was terrorizing the goalkeeper. So when he handled the ball, the goalkeeper is going to start screaming, "Hey, mark that man," because he knows that this man is going to blast the ball. So everybody used to be afraid of him. Now he's a Minister of Defense.
Football is a game for all. A game that respects no boundaries. Yet who owns this great game? Since its formation in 1904 at 229 Rue de Saint-Honoré in Paris, the International Football Federation, FIFA, have run world football. The first president of FIFA was a Frenchman, Robert Guérin.
Les Français étaient peut-être extrêmement créatifs, riches d'idées, entreprenants, mais ils ont été aidés aussi par des Hollandais, par des Allemands, par des Italiens. Donc on voit que les personnalités du football français ont une énorme influence sur le football international en général.
Initially, the inventors of the game wanted little to do with FIFA. But the 4 British associations did join in 1905. Englishman Daniel Burley Woolfall was made FIFA's second president. He helped introduce football as an official sport at the Olympics in 1908, and membership of FIFA doubled in his time as president. For 20 years, the Olympic football tournament was FIFA's World Championship. At the 1912 Stockholm Games, England claimed a second world title. But this era of cooperation between nations ended abruptly in 1914.
At half-time, speakers appealed to the younger men among the crowds to demonstrate their sportsmanship in a more serious game. And gradually there crept over the country that wave of emotion which was not apparent in the Britain at ordinary times, but in an emergency never failed.
With so many men away at war, this was a time of great liberation for women. They covered for the men at work, and some took their first steps on a football field. Games were played for charitable causes in the war effort, and women's football quickly attained a status not far short of men's. On Boxing Day 1920, 53,000 people went to Goodison Park in Liverpool to see the famous Dick Kerr ladies play against St Helens ladies. But rather than celebrating the growth of women's football, the Football Association in London decided to ban it. Frederick Wall of the Football Association felt that the popularity of the men's game was being affected by teams like Dick Kerr's. To play games, they had to travel abroad. But the ban soon hit hard, and by the mid-1920s, the women's game had all but died away. After the First World War, Wall also took the Football Association out of FIFA in protest at the continued membership of the defeated powers. They rejoined in 1924, but not in time to take part in the Paris Olympics of that year. An Olympics won in glorious style by Uruguay. The British withdrew again before the 1928 Amsterdam Olympics. Their strict interpretation of the word amateur was rejected. That meant that teams like Uruguay, who won a second world title in Amsterdam, were free to pay players for lost earnings.
Europeans, largely I think French-led, would at that stage, I think, have been prepared to pay broken time. They might have found agreement on the grounds that you don't actually pay people for playing, but they would have wanted some recompense to be made. And of course, if you didn't make that recompense, you were absolutely ensuring that only your old boys and only your middle class and upper middle class played football, which may well have been the idea.
In the absence of the British, the French once again took up the leadership of world football. In 1921, FIFA elected a Frenchman as its third president. A man who can be regarded as the first great statesman of world football, Jules Rimet. It had always been Rimet's dream for FIFA to have its own tournament, open to everyone, amateur or professional. In 1930, Uruguay hosted the first World Cup. Having made its mark in the Olympics, the Uruguayan team was the first to stamp its imprint on this new tournament.
Fue creciendo en el Uruguay, en Brasil, en Argentina, en otros países de América del Sur también, a partir del momento en que el fútbol se fue nacionalizando. Se fue nacionalizando y se fue popularizando.
Because of the long sea voyage, only 4 European nations had entered. It was the start of an often bitter rivalry between the two continents. Uruguay were the first winners. 4 years later in Italy, the World Cup had become an arena to score political points. Uruguay, still upset at Europe's snub in 1930, were not amongst those taking part in a tournament won by the Italians. Rimet himself was under fire when France was given the right to host the 1938 World Cup. The South American members of FIFA protested that it was their turn. Only Brazil took part. Europe's domination was complete in a tournament won again by Italy. Of continued concern, though, the absence of the British.
Professional sport is only one expression of the national psyche. And if you remember that Britain had made a virtue out of totally ignoring Europe for 200 years, our attentions and our vision was focused on the empire. We really didn't, unless somebody was a threat in Europe, we weren't remotely interested.
Whilst Paris was occupied during the Second World War, legend has it that Rimet hid the World Cup trophy under his bed. The war put a stop to the tournament for 12 years. After the war, football was seen as a way to cement wartime friendships.
Following their triumph over Cardiff, the Moscow Dynamos met Arsenal. I say they met them, but I very much doubt if they'd recognise them again, for it was very foggy football. The Russian ref is reported to have made some puzzling decisions. The Dynamos said Arsenal were in England rather than a club team. Certainly Arsenal were anxious to put out a side worthy of the Russians. But anyway, the English climate did its very utmost to wreck the whole show. The large crowd occasionally caught a hazy glimpse of the players as they loomed up out of the fog in pursuit of a half-invisible football.
The tour helped persuade the British to end their exile.
The Russians beat Arsenal, or England, and the fog 4-3.
It became obvious that we had, by withdrawing from FIFA, which we had done, we were cutting ourselves off from the mainstream of football. We're deluding ourselves.
One of the main figures behind the tour was the General Secretary of the Football Association, an Englishman called Stanley Rouse. Unlike his predecessor, Frederick Wall, Rouse championed international football and was to play a major role in its development.
We are sure of this, that the Dynamo Club has helped to write another page in the history of association football, and that if, as we believe, these matches do help to cement friendships between the peoples of the different countries, that there will be many opportunities for similar games.
To celebrate the British return to FIFA, a match was played between Britain and Europe in Glasgow in 1947. Because of the war, FIFA had found itself short of funds. The £30,000 raised from the game was given to them as a lifeline, a gesture that won Rouse many new friends in international circles.
He had great ability to praise at the right moment, even amongst his great friends in FIFA and so on. They grew to adore him because he managed them so well. You know, he was always full of praise if people had done anything well. And It came out even when he was running meetings. He was always so cheerful. Yes, quite a personality, a deep personality, and a good leader.
The World Cup returned in 1950. Air transport made the journey to Brazil easier, and thanks to Rouse, the English took part for the first time. But much to Rimé's disappointment, it was a journey only 5 other European nations bothered to make. Again, the winners came from the host continent, as Uruguay won the cup for the second time. The 1954 tournament in Switzerland was the last World Cup with Jules Rimet as FIFA president. Still recovering from the effects of the war, West Germany became the 3rd country to win the cup. In his 33-year tenure, Rimet had seen membership rise from just 24 countries to 82. When Rouse was elected FIFA president, his task was to maintain unity amongst the members in a rapidly changing world.
It was a case of influencing other countries, you know, for ideas and so on, and getting their support. I suppose it is now, really.
By the late 1950s, Africa was beginning to find a voice in world football. If not at first on the pitch, then certainly off it. When the African Football Confederation was formed in 1957, they excluded South Africa because of apartheid. They asked FIFA to do the same.
Stanley Rouse came, and the fight was going on, and the context was only that they cannot do anything for this apartheid because it is the rules of the country.
In Ethiopia, Idnekachu Tesema, a vocal leader of African football, disagreed with Rouse, who believed every country had a right to be a member no matter what their politics. Rouse argued that FIFA should not be an ideological battleground between East and West, North and South, black and white.
I remember an incident in 1964, Tokyo Olympics. That was the time when he gave up on Sir Stanley Rouse. The issue of eliminating South Africa from FIFA until such time apartheid was abolished. He presented this issue to the Congress, and it was not appreciated by Sir Stanley Rouse. He did not get any support. In fact, he was discouraged. His speech was interrupted by Sir Stanley Rouse. And then he understood that he needed more voices, more votes in FIFA.
As Africa broke free from colonialism, Tesema found himself part of a confederation that was rapidly expanding. And as FIFA made decisions on the basis of one country, one vote, Africa's voice was getting louder by the year. When the draw was made for the 1958 World Cup finals, every team taking part was from Europe or the Americas. The lack of an automatic place in the finals was to become a major bone of contention between Africa and FIFA. no one believed that an African country could match the exploits of Brazil in Sweden. But how could it be called a World Cup if whole continents were absent? Four years later, in Chile, all 16 teams in the finals again came from the Americas and Europe. If there was a challenge to be made against the supremacy of Brazil, it wasn't coming from Africa or Asia.
Sir Stanley's position was that Africa was not yet of the standard of the World Cup. Ignagacho's position was that he knew that Africa was not yet of the standard, but it would never get to that standard if it stays away from competitions. Let's come in, let's lose, let's learn, and in the end, we would be equal competitors.
When the teams arrived for the 1966 World Cup in England, the Africans were again absent, though this time, along with most Asian countries, they had boycotted the tournament in protest. Ironically, the tournament saw the split between Europe and South America disintegrate into outright hostility. Brazilian star Pelé complained bitterly about the lack of protection from the English referees.
Mais il faudrait ne pas oublier que des 9 arbitres, 3 arbitres et 6 linesmen, en Angleterre, 7 étaient anglais. Alors, je ne comprends pas qu'on fasse ça. Aujourd'hui, chaque pays donne ou un arbitre ou un juge de touche. C'est pas comme avant. Alors, l'équipe de Brésil a été coincée et elle n'a pas pu faire le jeu qu'elle devait faire. Elle est partie et elle est revenue.
In an already charged atmosphere, an English referee sent off 2 Uruguayans in their quarter-final against West Germany for violent conduct. Meanwhile, a West German referee was dismissing Ratin of Argentina in their quarter-final against England.
Lo quedamos 8 equipos, lo citan a los delegados al sorteo de árbitros. Y cuando va el argentino y el uruguayo, lo citaron a las 19 horas. Cuando llegan ellos, a las 19, no, ya lo sorteamos, era a las 18 horas.
What was supposed to be a festival of football was becoming very controversial.
Do you see this as a really important split now between South America and Europe on the future of world football?
Yes, things must change. In case the things go on this way, I believe that this World Cup is probably a failure.
Outside of Europe, the reputation of FIFA and its president was severely damaged. But the row between the two continents was not just confined to the World Cup. The 1967 Intercontinental Cup between South American club champions Racing of Argentina and European champions Celtic of Scotland often resembled a battle zone.
The things that were happening off the ball were just absolutely, totally not football at all. You know, they were pulling, you're pinching, you're spitting in the back of your head. I said, oh, what's happening here? We got a lot of bad publicity out of it because we had resorted to what they had been doing to us in the last 2 games, because you think to yourself, these guys are getting away with this in world football, after 2 games, and we're still going to get it in the 3rd game. We're going ahead because they're all Glasgow boys who take care of themselves anyway, don't worry about it.
Rouse was by now running a deeply divided organisation.
I could see him really trying to keep peace between the various associations, the factors. At FIFA's annual general meeting, the agenda was such that he was going to make sure that it was carried in the way he knew that the better elements in FIFA wanted it to go. And that was his skill too.
In Mexico in 1970, Africa at last had a team in the World Cup finals. Off the pitch, a new alliance was being forged. Together, South America and Africa could challenge the Europeans. The president of the victorious Brazilian Federation was João Havelange. With African support, he would challenge Rouse for the FIFA presidency.
That led to the 1974 coup d'etat, or election in which Havelange won by a narrow majority, and Sir Stanley was replaced as the president of FIFA.
En acceptant, j'ai dit que je ferais de mon mieux. J'ai eu le respect, aussitôt que mon nom a été présenté, communiqué à la FIFA, de téléphoner à M. Stanley Rouse, qui était le président de la FIFA à cette époque, et de lui dire s'il pouvait me recevoir à Londres, que je voudrais le voir. Je suis venu à Londres, il m'a reçu, nous avons déjeuné ensemble, et alors je lui ai dit, M. Rouse, il va y avoir une élection, et il y a 2 candidats, vous-même et moi. Moi, j'étais un ancien nageur, et un de nous 2 va gagner la médaille, ou vous, ou moi.
When Rouse had been elected in 1961, there were only 67 delegates eligible to vote. In the 1974 election, this former international referee had the job of convincing 120. His program was based on a proven record of running FIFA and his own probity. Havelange ran a slick and aggressive campaign that offered a share of power to the younger football nations.
Havelange was ambitious. He wanted to be the president of FIFA. And for Nagacho, Sir Stanley did not give any indication of assisting Africa in the political arena, like eliminating South Africa from FIFA.
The Brazilian FA were going around the African countries, and there were 36 African countries, and they all had votes, and they were paying for 2 representatives to go to FIFA conference, all expenses paid, if they would give the vote to Havelange.
Their attitude towards football and sport is so different from ours. I don't think they've been at it long enough, really, or for some reason or other, they haven't developed the same sporting instincts that we have towards football and sport.
What's wrong with their attitude?
I think it's a bit too commercial, for one thing. It's a bit too passionate on the field sometimes, and also off the field. this is where I think the administrators don't act, or wouldn't act, as the Europeans act.
Before the 1974 World Cup kicked off, Rouse lost the election to Havelange. The first time FIFA had a non-European president. Over the following 24 years, he transformed football into a multi-billion-dollar business. The game was entering a brave new world.
In parting, I can sincerely say that we have been happy to meet and make friends. We shall be sorry to leave. Once more, thank you all.
At the World Cup, Havelange began the process of restructuring world football. To implement his plan, he needed money. This was the start of football's partnership with large multinational corporations.
Quand de l'élection qui s'est posée en 1974, Adidas, par M. Dassler, a fait toute la campagne pour M. Stanley Rouse. En possession de mon poste, je suis allé voir M. Horst Dassler, qui m'a reçu. Et je dois vous dire que je dois à M. Horst Dassler les premiers succès que j'ai eus comme président de la FIFA. Nous sommes arrivés à un contrat très important pour la FIFA qui a été l'élément de base pour qu'on ait pu avoir une évolution du football dans le monde.
Dassler's company, Adidas, was just one of a growing number of companies who saw football as an ideal advertising medium for their products to a global market. FIFA's revenues soared. Income from television rights to the 1978 World Cup in Argentina were not huge, just $10 million. But the World Cup was beginning to generate large sums from a host of other related activities.
Vous dites qu'il y a trop d'argent dans le football. Vous ne travaillez pas pour avoir de l'argent pour vous et pour votre compagnie. Pourquoi est-ce que le football c'est de trop? Pourquoi est-ce que généralement gagne tout son argent? Pourquoi toutes les grandes compagnies veulent de l'argent? Pourquoi que toutes les bourses dans le monde ne pensent qu'à ça? Et le football a son droit. Et le football travaille.
When membership of FIFA rose above 200 countries in 1998, it had 15 more than the United Nations. For a small country like Trinidad, FIFA has provided not only money but expertise to help their football association provide facilities and training for all levels of the game. To win a World Cup in cricket is a realistic dream in Trinidad, though football is testing those dreams to the limit.
Independence has freed many of the Caribbean territories from the trappings of colonialism, and cricket has been viewed as as a colonial sport, one of the relics of colonialism. Added to this fact, because of the worldwide appeal of football, 203 countries play football. 10 countries play cricket. That by itself serves as a magnet to attract other members.
The limit of Trinidad's ambitions in football would be to qualify for the World Cup. But this is a country capable of producing players who can compete at the very highest level.
I used to look at John Barnes as inspiration, but now people can look at myself in the Caribbean, from the Caribbean, who's born and bred and one of their own, and saying that, you know, this guy made it, and hopefully I've encouraged a lot of people out there in the West Indies to go out there and say, hey, you know, look at this guy, he's made it, why can't we not do the same?
In 1999, the João Havelange Centre of Excellence was opened in Trinidad to train future Dwight Yorks in the Central American and Caribbean region. It also serves as a centre to train coaches and referees and was funded by FIFA under the guidance of Havelange.
We shall be able to reap rewards of that investment. And therefore, because he was a visionary, because he understood the needs of the downtrodden and the poor, because of the fact that he was one who was open to all, I repeat, he will always remain my icon.
In the 24 years that Havelange was in power, another previously neglected area of football experienced a surge of interest. This was a Scandinavian-led revolution. A revolution that saw women accepted back into football on a scale not known since the days of Dick Kerr ladies.
Med den entusiasmen og det som var rundt Dick Kerr Ladies, hvis det hadde fått fortsette, så tror jeg at kvinnefotballen har vært veldig stor i både i England og i en god del andre land. For det var jo, de spilte turneringer, uoffisielle VM i både Italia og andre steder såpass tidlig. Og jeg tror at det hadde hatt en utrolig positiv effekt, og jeg tror at det hadde vært mer women's game.
A changing room at a football stadium. But what's going on, or rather, what's coming off? The answer is a soccer match between 22 feminine footballers who'll never make the cup final. But they've certainly got the right idea, although we're not so sure about the crowd. They were more influenced by form than the run of the ball. But what talent, what technique, what forward movements. A bunch of shapely soccer stars who can take care of anybody's passes. These girls know every rule of the game, and incidentally they're also very good at defence.
In the early 1970s, Denmark won 2 unofficial World Cups, the second in Mexico. FIFA could no longer ignore the growth of women's football.
En 1986, au congrès qui a eu lieu au Mexique, une dame qui était déléguée par la Norvège au congrès a fait un appel au congrès, au président de la FIFA, pour que le football féminin soit reconnu. Le football féminin a été reconnu. La première Coupe du Monde s'est jouée en Chine en 1991. Les États-Unis ont été les vainqueurs.
In 1999, the United States staged the 3rd Women's World Cup. The 90,000 who witnessed their victory over China in the final is a world record for women's sport. The future of football is feminine, FIFA like to say. A sport for the 21st century.
Og det vil jo være veldig vanskelig å nekte en del mennesker som det som man brenner av hjertet sitt, og liksom si at du får ikke lov å drive på med det, selv om du synes det er fantastisk og flott. Så jeg tror det at kvinner bare valgte å spille fotball, uavhengig om de var inkludert i FIFA eller ikke.
Not all of Havelange's actions were well received. Africa had voted him into power, but it was not until the 1982 World Cup that he gave them a second place in the finals. A finals in which Algeria beat West Germany. The Germans reached the final, having contrived a result with Austria that saw Algeria knocked out. FIFA took no action. The Italians saw that justice was done. There was also unease over the manner in which Havelange and FIFA chose Mexico to host the 1986 World Cup.
They sent an inspection team, but they sent it only to Mexico and not to the United States and Canada, which had also applied. Then, as soon as the presentations were over, the FIFA didn't even retire. Havelange said, "Do you accept the report of the inspection team?" They made a report only on Mexico, so they all voted for that. So it wasn't even a glorious failure, it was a total failure.
Relations between Europe and South America remained as competitive as ever on the pitch. Off it, though, tensions were again rising.
Les membres qui ont été élus par l'Europe sont venus à la FIFA, au comité exécutif, mais la tranquillité que nous avions, la compréhension, l'amitié que se posait, elle a été différente.
Väldigt tydlig president. När Havelange kom in i ett rum, då var det ingen tvekan om vem som kom. Och han bidrog därför till att världen fick en väldig respekt för fotboll genom hans personlighet.
Since the time of Rouse, Europe had taken a back seat in FIFA. But in the 1990s, with newfound wealth from the Champions League, UEFA, European Confederation, began to flex its muscles. UEFA tournaments were producing moments of high drama on a regular basis. The 1990 World Cup, on the other hand, will never be regarded as a classic. West Germany's 1-0 win over Argentina was the first time fewer than 3 goals had been scored in a final. And the only goal came from a penalty. Four years later, the final between Brazil and Italy finished goalless. Two World Cup finals, and there hadn't been a goal from open play. The supremacy of the World Cup was being challenged, and the seeds of a revolt against Havelange were being sown. 4 years later, he faced the first challenge to his presidency.
Han har en diktatorisk läggning. Han fattar gärna besluten själv och sen informerar han omvärlden om vad han har beslutat.
Havelange stepped down rather than fight, leaving Sepp Blatter, his choice as successor, to take on UEFA's Lennart Johansson.
Monsieur Joseph Blatter, 111. Monsieur Lennart Johansson, 80.
Jag hade så mycket löften. Jag var så naiv att jag trodde på dem som sa sig vilja rösta på mig. Så hände en massa saker som den i England till exempel och på Afrika och på andra håll. Så den gjorde att jag märkte redan i första omröstningen vart vinden blåste. Så jag bara gick upp och sa the game is over.
Blatter's presidency got off to an unsure start. But this was a humiliating defeat for Europe. The Havelange Blatter empire began to show signs of strain when FIFA's business partners, ISL, went bankrupt in 2001. The Havelange legacy, though, lives on. The World Cup Finals now has 32 teams, twice the number when he took over, 12 of which come from outside of Europe and South America. One day, there may even be a winner from another continent.
J'ai accompli une tâche, je crois, comme je le disais, que le football a pris naissance et une position dans le monde tout à fait différente de ce qu'elle était.
The first hosting of the World Cup outside of Europe and the Americas went to South Korea and Japan in 2002. But until Africa is given that honour, FIFA's claim of running a game for all sounds hollow, especially in the light of South Africa's 2006 World Cup bid.
Football is the passion of the South African nation. Football, I think, was the carrier of hope and the aspirations of the people on this continent. Even those who were imprisoned on Robben Island, where our former president Nelson Mandela was sent, all the other activities were banned, but we had football teams playing on the Robben Island. So always it carried the aspirations.
South Africa needed the support of the majority of the 24-man executive committee of FIFA. They got 11 votes from the Americas and Africa. Germany got 12 from Europe and Asia. Charles Dempsey of Oceania abstained.
And the winner Deutschland.
Had Dempsey voted for South Africa, had Blatter used his casting vote as promised, they would have won.
It felt like we were in a penalty shootout. It was 11-11, and then you have 5 penalty kickers. 4 scores for both sides, and it is now 4-4 in the penalties, and your 5th kicker decides to walk off the field and not take the kick, and your opposition scores, and so you lose 5-4 in the penalty shootout.
Nothing happened because I didn't vote. So by doing nothing, I got a lot of publicity. Simple. I did what is in the best interest of Oceania.
Let's drink a toast to Germany, to Africa, and to soccer.
Cheers. What the president is saying is that we're free to be drunk.
FIFA is the biggest grouping of nations in the world, and it controls 1 billion players. Their second century promises to be as eventful as the first.
Football cannot only be good, because the fifth of the world population is a mirror of our society. And our society is not only good, our society is also cheating. And sometimes our society is not disciplined, is even violent. But football can help for a better understanding, because it is this game which brings all people, all races, all religion, all ages, all genders together.